Good morning and welcome to the San Mateo ELA ELD Framework launch. And I am Tom Adams. I'm the Director of Curriculum Frameworks and Instructional Resources at the California Department of Education. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Okay. So just to let you know, all sessions are being videotaped today. So if you have friends back at your district office who were unable to attend this event because it is sold out, let them know that there will be the videos from today's presentations on my digital chalkboard. So let them know that. And also if you need to review, say, some of the things that are being presented today and you want to hear it again, you can visit it there. Let me just say a couple things about this event. This is the second one of the ELA ELD launch event, and I just have to say that one of the great things when we looked around and wanted to do it in Northern California, Gary Waddell over there was one of the first persons to actually say, hey, we'll help you out, and I think that's really a great sense of the partnership between the Department of Education and the San Mateo County Office of Education. Thank you, Gary. And I'd like to thank some of the people involved in the development of the framework. We had teachers and focus groups. We had members of the Instructional Quality Commission and the State Board. We had the entire Curriculum Framework Committee members. And as you can tell, there was a lot of hands involved in it. But unlike the old adage where too many cooks spoil the broth, in this case, we actually had a great improvement because of everyone's participation. And so I just want to say that I'm very proud of the document. And now let me just mention one thing about it. It is rather lengthy, right? Many of you probably haven't read the 1,365 pages of it. But let me just quote from a movie I just saw recently. Let me just say this. Everything is awesome, okay? Yeah, who knows what the Lego movie might inspire today. I also just want to acknowledge the writers of the framework. One of the things is a few years ago when this all began, I called Nancy Brennelson. And I said, Nancy, you want to help with the next ELA framework? And she said, well, what's it involved? I said, only the new standard. And she said, yeah, that sounds good. I go, and we're going to have to bring together the ELD standard. She goes, okay. And I said, and we're going to have to make this all understandable for K-12 teachers, yet at the same time be based on the most current and confirmed research. And she said, well, okay. I don't think she regretted it to this day, but I think she's realized that without her guidance and her knowledge of the previous framework, we couldn't have been there. But the great thing working with Nancy is she brought along some great friends with her. One is Hallie Yap. Hallie's been just tremendous in terms of contributing to the framework, making sure everything reads well, is understandable by teachers. And then we got extra help on ELD, and Pam Spiescher, who helped with the ELD standards and came and helped us on the framework. And it was truly an incredible document along the way and a great process. But I do want to say that one of the things that happened during this process is we did lose some of our people who contributed. We lost one teacher who taught up in the Sierra foothills. She could never make it to the meetings because of cancer. And then Bob Calfee, just down the road at Stanford, as one of his last acts as a ELA expert, joined us on the committee and contributed greatly to it. And so we're lucky to have Bob there through the entire process and actually have his great insights into the document. So truly a momentous occasion, but also one we just want to acknowledge that people made great sacrifices for, but they certainly did want to do it as making sure that Common Core, ELA, ELD was actually part of the curriculum. Now, I did mention Gary earlier. Gary, do you want to come up and say a few words?
Thank you, Tom. It is a pleasure to see everyone here today. We're thrilled that you're here. On behalf of County Superintendent Ann Campbell, we'd like to welcome you this morning to this event. And welcome to foggy San Mateo this morning also. We're very pleased to host this event. The staff here at the San Mateo County office that serve the 23 districts in our county are strong proponents of this new framework and the course that it sets for us all, truly aligning ELA and ELD in some groundbreaking ways that we're really excited about. So it's nice to have you here this morning. And lastly, we'd just like to give a huge thanks to the department for leading this work that really is groundbreaking work, and for putting these events together for us all for kind of deep quality professional learning as we launch this in the right way. It really is remarkable work, and I hope for you that you have a great day of inquiry, learning, and networking. Thank you.
And I just want to return to this theme of partnership, because I think one of the things you'll find in reading this framework is that this is the first word in an ELA-ELD partnership. It's not the last word. We expect you to have the knowledge you gain today to actually take to your district and classrooms, and then to make that a good foundation for working with your students as well as your colleagues. And speaking of that, I just have to acknowledge my colleague who's in charge of the Professional Learning Support Division, Carrie Roberts, instrumental in helping us through this process. I also just have to acknowledge two people in my division who really made this happen, who from beginning to end, we wouldn't have had the framework committee meetings as well set up. We wouldn't have had the rich content that we needed in this framework without them. We wouldn't have this event without them. And that's Cynthia Gunderson and Kristen Cruz-Allen. Can we give them a big hand? One of the things, though, one of my hats that I wear at work is I'm the executive director of the Instructional Quality Commission. And that means I get to work with 18 educators from throughout the state. And they were so important in this framework development because they also shared the sense of partnership, of being open to suggestions from the field, of seeing comments from teachers who had never participated before, actually address their comments seriously and try and incorporate it and address it in the framework. And so let me just point out those who are here in the audience. Joanne Niskin, who's currently the chair. Is Joanne in the room? Okay, she's probably getting ready for her presentation. And you'll also meet Lauren Wild, a current commissioner, a commissioner who was recently on the commission but left in December because her term ended, Kristen Bennett. There's Lauren Wild, and there's Joanne Niskin. Just slowly coming in through. So Kristen Bennett, Carlos Ulloa is there. All great people to work with, and definitely helped make sure that this framework was a partnership. But I also just want to turn the microphone over in a minute to a former state superintendent who decided to come and join us on the commission and provide his leadership and guidance that he had to the framework process. Someone who knows language arts, but also all curriculum areas. A person I think did well to join us and made sure we kept attuned to the field, an expert in the field, and someone, just a great person to meet, Bill Honig. Bill?
Thank you, Tom. I'd like to second, the writers were terrific, and you're good to hear from them, and the staff of the department were amazing. My fellow IQ members really took this to heart, and it was a real joint effort. I'd like to start by just asking you, what is a framework? What does it do? I mean, what's this purpose? The standards are there. The standards are not a curriculum. The framework's not a curriculum. Basically, it's specifications for what a curriculum should look like, what should be included. It helps in a scope and sequence, trying to figure out what's done during a particular year, gives you a flavor of what you should be looking for, and it's kind of a guide to thinking about instruction and curriculum. And that's important because many districts went directly from standards to lessons or units. And some of these units are useful, but I think now that the framework has come out, it's time to revisit this and take a look at the year's work and see how it all fits together and whether there are gaps and what to do about it. And many districts are doing that, and the counties are helping that out. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the process because Tom mentioned it, but it's important to kind of talk a little bit about how this framework was produced. Some of you here, I was at San Mateo, some of you here were at the focus groups. There were 4 of them statewide to get teachers and others, educators' opinions about what we should be putting in the framework. The Instructional Quality Commission was mentioned. This is an organization appointed by the board to develop frameworks, to adopt books, to advise the state board on areas of accountability and assessment and so forth. And the process is that we looked at top grade educators to put on the framework committee. It was chaired by 2 county curriculum people, Becky Sullivan and Martha Hernandez from Ventura and Sacramento. They did a wonderful job. We had 2 because of the integration issue. We wanted to get a broader sense of the whole thing. And they held a series of meetings. And I guess Sherlock Holmes, you know, the dog that didn't bark. This was not that controversial when we all got to working together. Previous ELA frameworks were, and ELD issues basically stalled everything. This one, there was a large amount of support, and I'll talk a little bit about why that was. But so the process was thorough, and then it went to went back to the IQC after the framework committee and the writers did that. The IQC members had some comments. They revised it. Then it went to state board. A couple of the state board members wanted the foundation part to be beefed up, and we did that. The writers did that, and we got the final product. So it's Tom's mentioned, I just wanted to go a little bit more thoroughly how broadly people participate in this, and I think that's one of the reasons why you don't have some of the controversy in this state that you've had in other states, is because so many people have been involved. I'm just going to go over 3 or 4 big issues, and then you're going to hear from the writing team as they go through in detail. And today you will hear then the more details when you go out to your particular sessions. The first one was nationally the standards were kind of veering off a little bit. They were being looked at as merely analytical. How do you analyze a piece of work? How do you make an argument? Those are very important issues, and they're embedded in the framework. But that's not all what ELA, ELD is about. It's also about civic responsibility, about becoming a literate individual, about knowing something about our culture and truth. In fact, anybody takes the New York Times, Leon Weisseller, I think his name is, wrote the front page article in the book review this weekend. I'm just going to read a small little quote from him. What's English all about, or English language arts all about? It's so that the individual can know more about how things work, develop their powers of discernment and judgment, their competence in matters of truth and goodness and beauty, to equip themselves adequately for the choices and the crucibles of private and public life. You will find language like that in the framework, and we wanted to make sure that we talked about that area too. And therefore, the way I like to look at it is there are 2 basic parts here. There's the instrumental part, the analytical part, which is, I mentioned. There's also what students read during their careers. And that's why in there you'll see we put in an independent reading program for each youngster. We wanted to pay attention to the quality and the content of what is being read. So it's not just an instrumental, it's a broader purpose. The other major reason why I think we avoided the controversy is, first of all, we had a great chair of the subject matter committee, Joanne Ishkin, who's now the chair of the IQC. And I don't know if you got to see her when she walked in. She walked in late. Joanne, stand up, because there she is. She's going to be working, and she did a great job. We should give her. And Lauren, she's now chair of the subject matter committee and doing a fine job. She's going to be working on the adoption when we do the adoption of the books this spring and summer. But one of the reasons I think that we were able to build such a broad aspect of support was that the ELD community, Pam and Kenji Okuda and the department group really started off with the premise, how do we help our EL kids make it in Common Core? That was their driving thought. So right from the start, we were pointing in the same direction. And they tried to figure out all the things you need to do to help kids make that. And they came up with 5 areas of which to organize the information, which then the framework committee adopted as the spine of this framework. And you're going to hear about those 5 areas. I'll just mention them in just a couple of comments. But the fact that they started from that premise made the integration of the 2 ideas work. We didn't know if it was going to work at the start. We didn't know it was going to blow up. It didn't. And that was, I think, a major tribute to the foresight of the people that were working on this. So we did come up with these 5 areas. And they all really are about getting meaning, comprehension and meaning. The first one, obviously, starting out is the foundation skills. You're going to hear a little bit about that. By the way, those of you that have can go online. If you want to get the framework, just Google draft ELA/ELD framework California. You'll go right to the page with all the chapters that people are going to be talking about. And right below that, on the lower part of the page, is an area called resources. And in those resources is the foundation paper, a white paper that Hallie Yopp did. She'll be talking about that. That goes into detail from the framework, pulls it together in a user-friendly way of what things you need to think about when you address that area. There's also a summary of the document by Joanne, myself, and a woman named Carol Jago, who was the head of the National Council of Teachers of English. Very bright woman, very well knowledgeable. And she wrote an appendix to the framework on the importance of literature and text complexity and so forth, which is available there too. So that's a summary, which is 4 pages, might be useful. There's also a chronicle of the vignettes, lists all the vignettes that are in the framework so that makes it easily accessible. And then there's finally a webinar of our 3 stalwarts here who did a webinar. So that's for your help. Okay, just something very simple about the 5 areas. Foundations, obviously, you can't get meaning from text if you don't know, if the word's in your speaking vocabulary, but you can't decode it. So you have to be automatic with it, and decoding and knowing how to do that, and phonics and all that goes into that. In California, we took another step. We went to 5th grade, and so we talked about multisyllabic and fluency in other areas too, which you'll hear about. The second way you get meaning for text is language. If you don't know the word, there has to be a strong vocabulary development, and we emphasize that in the framework, learning words. But it's more than that. It's also syntax and text structure and those kinds of things. So language is a crucial area that came up from the ELD group. And vocabulary, you'll hear about academic language. It's a little bit more than that. Everybody here know about Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 words. So Tier 1 are the automatic words. Tier 2, Tier 3 are the democracy and photosynthesis. But Tier 2 are the ones that make a difference in getting meaning. And so if you have a fervent desire, what's fervent? That's that's a kind of Tier 2 word. So it goes into that. The third one is content. This document really stresses the need for history, social science, humanities as part of especially at elementary, to have integrated, and at high schools to have a cooperative effort where you're doing biographies and you're doing novels that go along with the Civil War, or whatever the topic is. So that content has two meanings. One is the text structure for science or history. It also is making sure you integrate a good broad development of content. Research is basically pretty clear on this. How well you comprehend also depends not just on your skills, but also on how much you know about a particular subject. So if you know something about the subject and bring it to it. And there's a great article about this, about text complexity issues by David Pearson. I don't know the site, but he's one of the authors. You can look him up, and he talks about the purpose you're reading for and what you bring to it. There's a category called meaning making, which is how you make connections and how you make inferences and how you do close reading of text and all those kinds of things that you've heard about. They'll get into that. And finally, there's expression, which is basically using the knowledge for a purpose. So you're discussing things, you're writing a paper, you're doing a project. So you're reading for a purpose, and how you express both in writing and in speaking are important. So those are the 5 areas. They'll go into that in more detail. I just want to touch 2 or 3 other minor points. I don't think we can pull this off. This is a 4 or 5 year effort just to come close to what we're talking about, this active curriculum. And Mike Kurz from the state board has said that, look, we're not expecting everybody to get this done this year. We're going to take our time and do it right. And I think the board's been pretty strong on that, as has the governor and the state superintendent, which is good leadership. But unless you have a good collaborative working team at the school site, which is supported by the district, this is just too tough to pull off. So that's, when you're talking about this kind of active curriculum, that really has to be built in. And one of our chapters, which they'll talk about, talks about how to do that and the importance of that. The other final issue is text complexity. And I think the framework takes a balanced approach on this, and you'll hear more about it. There are some things that students should read that are at the high level of what they can handle, and you have to scaffold it, and you'll hear about how to do that. There are some things that students should read that are at comfort level, and that they just like or they're interested in, and that should be part of it. And there's some things that maybe, it's the start. You read to kids a little bit above the level that they can actually read. You have decodable text, which reinforces the letter sounds that they're getting. So just a variety of approaches is the best bet. Some people have said only give kids things that are challenging or only give level text. We tried to stay away from that. Anyway, I wish you good luck in this. This is a very, very challenging and exciting document, and it has a lot of great ideas in there. If we can get a curriculum instruction along the lines this framework talks about, I think it's going to be wonderful for our children. Thank you.
So the next thing is, I think it's so appropriate that we show this next piece of our morning presentation, because today is the State of the Union, and the good work that we have done here in California has actually reached the federal level, to the point that we now have a welcoming video from the Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan.
Hi, I'm Arne Duncan, the U.S. Secretary of Education. First of all, congratulations on the launch of the new ELA ELD Framework. Your work to integrate 2 sets of world-class standards affirms California's commitment to ensuring that all students, not just some, receive an education that truly prepares them both for college and for careers. The new framework also takes into account the rich diversity of California's students, providing critical supports for English language learners. I'm excited that educators, administrators, coaches, and others who work with youth are all represented here today. It's a great opportunity for you to ask questions and learn about the new framework on a deeper level. And I urge you to please take advantage of this professional learning opportunity and connect with one another and share your story. President Obama and I believe in raising the bar for every student, regardless of circumstance. And that means closing opportunity and achievement gaps at every phase. Despite the national, state, and local best efforts, some students, especially those in low-income communities, still lack access to challenging courses, to effective teachers and school leaders, to sufficient resources and other supports, and safe and healthy learning environments. We must do more now to eliminate those barriers. Our country and our children simply cannot wait. All students should have an equal opportunity to learn and excel in a safe and supportive environment. And that's why I'm so excited about California's ELA ELD Framework. It's acting on a shared vision for educational equity by providing strong and clear guidance on enacting the standards. The framework makes it clear that schools must create learning environments where all students can and do thrive. So thanks again for all of your hard work on behalf of our nation's students every single day. You're leading our young people where they need to go and setting a fantastic example for our country. I wish you all the best.
Just one of the things, that's a great video showing the shared values and goals of California and the federal government on this issue. And it's so important to realize that we are in this all together. And let me just say, sometimes I think the E in ELA stands for equality, and sometimes I think the E in ELD stands for equity. And two of the three writers here, I think, kept that in mind throughout the whole process. And so here to give an overview of the framework is Nancy Brenelson, Hallie Yop, and Pam Spiescher.
And we're here this morning to share just provide you an overview of the framework, although the day is about familiarizing you. That's the overarching goal. It's familiarizing you with the framework. You got to hear some about the process, and it truly was a collaborative endeavor, not only from those voices that began way back in the focus groups, but all through the process. And your three primary writers here were indeed the epitome of collaboration, because each one of us spent many, many hours engaged in sharing with one another. We didn't say, you do this part, you do this part, you do this part, and so you have this disjointed document. In fact, all of our voices and all of the voices of those who participated flow throughout the entire thing. Our job this morning is to provide you with a quick overview. You have in your handout these slides, so I'm not going to read everything to you, but you'll see that we represent different organizations here and have backgrounds in education, all of us for many, many years, all three of us for many years. Our agenda this morning is to share with you the purposes of the framework, the principles guiding development, and some unique aspects of this framework, and then share with you the big picture of ELA literacy and ELD instruction, and finally share with you the organization. Let's start with the purposes of an ELA ELD framework. Again, Bill mentioned this to a certain extent earlier, and we've bulleted those on this slide for you, that it provides instructional guidance and lesson ideas for TK through 12 teachers. It translates research into practice. It guides school districts in curriculum development and program design. It guides professional learning and leadership, and it directs publishers to provide high-quality materials that meet the intent of California's vision of implementation of both the ELA literacy and ELD standards. As we began, we thought, what principles do we want to guide us throughout this entire process? Again, that began more than 2 years ago. And these are the key principles. You'll find them in Chapter 1 of the framework, that schooling should help all students achieve their highest potential. That's a resounding theme throughout. That the responsibility for learners' literacy and language development is shared. It's not just the ELD teacher who's responsible for this, or the English language arts teacher in high school who's responsible for that, that in fact it's shared among all of us as educators, administrators, faculty, and certainly district offices, community, parents, families, that it is a shared responsibility. That the ELA, ELD curricula should be well designed, comprehensive, and integrated. Lots of details on each of these bullets are in the framework. That effective teaching is not good enough just to have an excellent curriculum, but that in fact effective teaching is essential too. You need the right people in those classrooms engaged on a daily basis with those kids. You need the right specialists supporting what happens with the children and youth in our classrooms. And finally, we wanted to keep fundamental to our work that notion of motivation and engagement, that we want kids to want to come to school, to want to engage in the process, to feel that their voices are heard, to find meaning in what they are doing. You will notice this throughout, that many of the activities and scenarios that we provide are about connecting richly with things that are relevant in students' lives and piquing their interest in those rich, broader views and lenses on the world. So those were the principles that guided our development of every chapter in this framework. You also will notice in your PowerPoint that we've highlighted several things that we think this makes this unique. As you know, the Common Core State Standards is a multi-state endeavor, right? But the way California is choosing it to implement it may very well be unique. That, in fact, we have, as you've heard over and over, integrated 2 sets of standards. That is truly a groundbreaking endeavor, as you heard from the Secretary of Education. That we discuss the standards in terms of key themes, so that as you think about ELA literacy and those strands of reading, writing, listening, speaking, and language, we didn't just talk about them as, oh, here's reading, over here's writing, over here's speaking and listening. Nor did we do that with the parts of the ELD standards. Interacting in meaningful ways isn't totally separated from about how English language works, isn't a complete isolation from the foundational skills. In fact, we don't talk about them strictly in those silos. We have found some key themes that cut across each of those. And those, we'll be talking more about those in just a few moments. We also, of course, this framework integrates multiple content areas with literacy and language development. It tells and shows. Why is this document 1,300 plus pages long? It's because not only do we say, here's what research says about good practice. Here's what we know about beginning those foundational skills and the development in young children. Here's what we know about how language is learned and how children engage with language and use it in purposeful ways. Here's what we know about disciplinary literacy. We don't just say that, we show it. And we show it through snapshots, which are short scenarios. These are deeply grounded in current and seminal research. And we show it through vignettes. I just threw up here some of the snapshots. So this adds to the length considerably because there are so many applications and examples of practice. And this, by the way, was a clear message from those focus groups 2 years ago. Show us how it works. Give us many examples of practice. So there's an example in kindergarten, in grade 3, in middle school, and in high school. There are examples there's snapshots of practice in the assessment chapter, in the access and equity chapter, in the 21st century skills chapter. So that adds considerably to the length of this document. Not only do we tell and show, but another unique feature is that clear message on access and equity so that all students can reach their highest potential. And finally, it is a clear voice for promoting the notion of collaboration and shared responsibility. So these are aspects of the framework that we believe makes it a unique way of thinking about implementation of the new sets of standards and what they really mean for us here in California with our richly diverse state. This is the big picture. The big picture is exemplified in this image, this graphic, that we call the circles of implementation. You have a copy of this in your program. We'll be talking about it all day long. It fundamentally captures so much that is important in where we're going in this framework. And let's talk, if we were to build this together, I'd have a blank screen and that outer ring would pop up. That outer ring represents the overarching goals of ELD literacy / and ELD instruction. We know, and if you've been thinking about the state standards, You've been thinking about readiness for college, careers, and California ads, and civic life. What does it take? That's an overarching goal. By the time kids exit our TK through 12 systems, we want kids to be ready for college, careers, entering the workforce capable of engaging in the kind of work that gives them a future, and to participate wisely and thoughtfully in civic life. That's one of the overarching goals. The second overarching goal, of course, is connected to that, and you've probably been thinking about this if you've been addressing the Common Core State Standards at all. And that's that notion of the capacities of literate individuals. We want to ensure that all students develop those capacities. Those are the 7 capacities. Students demonstrate independence, they value evidence, they are responsive to the demands of the task, right, to the audience and so forth, that they comprehend as well as critique, that they build content knowledge, that they use media and technology wisely and strategically, and that they are develop rich perspectives on others' cultures and backgrounds and so forth. So those probably sounded familiar to you. So that too is one of the overarching goals here. A third overarching goal is that students develop the skills for living and learning in the 21st century. And there are many of those, and there are a variety of ways that people discuss them. I'll just highlight a few key ones right here. One is those 4 C's. One set is those 4 C's that many of you have heard about, right? The collaboration, communication, creative thinking, and critical thinking. Another set is the notion of technology and media skills, right? Being facile with those. A third set is global competencies, being able to work with diverse others in diverse locations around the globe. Those are among those 21st century skills that are part of the target for us as we engage in this endeavor of ELA and ELD instruction. And then finally, and this is also very unique to California, we have highlighted that notion of ensuring that all of our youth become broadly literate. And what does that mean? That means that they have read widely. That means that they have been exposed to the classics as well as to contemporary literature. It means that they have read across all genres. But it's more than reading, it's also viewing, that they have observed plays in action. They have studied Shakespeare and they have seen that in action. That they have participated and seen poetic readings. That they have participated and witnessed spoken word. That they are students who have been broadly exposed and engaged in what it means to be a literate individual. The center of this graphic are the standards, the CCSS for ELA/literacy. There they are, reading, writing, listening, speaking in all disciplines. And notice that in the heart of that are the ELD standards. They're not something separate over here. Oh, we'll get to that for some of these kids sometime with our specialist who'll handle it, right? They, in fact, are in the heart of what we're doing for the students who are our English learners. And those standards, as I alluded to earlier, we think about and we address and we organize in terms of key themes. And those key themes cut across all those strands, cut across these parts of the ELD standards. And those are these 5 that you see here, these circles immediately outside of the standards. That meaning making. When we read, we engage in meaning making. That when we write, we are writing to express meaning, to convey ideas, to convey information. So meaning making isn't just about comprehending and reading. Meaning making is something far grander, far richer, far overarching. It also cuts across the speaking and listening standards, doesn't it? Right? When we speak and engage with others, the purpose is to engage in meaning making with one another. That also the language standards. The purpose of those language standards is to ensure meaningful conversations, meaningful engagement with one another. So meaning making is this overarching idea that cuts across those standards as well as the ELD standards. More about those in some of the small group sessions later today. That language development cuts across all of those strands. That fundamental, a cornerstone, if you will, of literacy and language development is language development itself. The vocabulary, the syntax, the larger structures of how things are put together, the appropriate use of different registers, and so forth. That effective expression also cuts across those strands. Where do you see an author powerfully conveying his or her ideas? I remember reading with one of my kids in high school a book that literally tears were streaming down my face as I was reading a section aloud. And I looked at my daughter and said, what did the author do that is evoking this extraordinary emotion from me? And she's sobbing too. And we go back and we read the paragraph. I said, oh my gosh, look at how this author phrased this. Look at how the author took us from here to here. That's effective expression. We address that in the reading standards. It is also addressed in the writing as we ourselves want to express ourselves effectively to communicate ideas for whatever purpose that may be. It also matters as we listen and speak. How do we engage? How do we effectively engage with one another? And it also cuts across all of the other sets of standards. Likewise, content knowledge, we'll be doing a session on that later today. Content knowledge is powerfully related to development of your language as well as your literacy skills. That's not new research. It continues to be reinforced by what we see in the research, that the richer your background knowledge, that the more knowledge you have, the richer you can engage with text. And that in fact, the more literate you are and that you can use text, the more knowledge you can attain. So those two are, there's a rich reciprocal relationship there, and so that too is highlighted as we think across all these strands in ELD, ELA. Finally, the foundational skills are fundamental to ensuring that kids can access the print. And so again, there's another session on that later. I'm just going to leave that. I see we did manage to get this part of our animation going. The point being that those are all overlapping. The point being, I can't really talk about meaning making with also thinking about language and also thinking about having knowledge. So those are overlapping, and as you think about different standards, you may think, oh my goodness, this taps meaning making. Oh my goodness, this also taps effective expression. Oh my goodness, look at what this ELD standard is saying here and how that's richly related to language, effective expression, content knowledge, and meaning making, and how you got to have those foundational skills to get you there. Finally, on this graphic is the white field. The white field represents the context in which we assert that instruction must take place. That in fact, it should be integrated. That's the richest way to learn if we're not treating every subject matter and every strand and every part of the standards, every content area in a silo. That rich integration is key. So we assert that in this framework, that the best context is one in which all these areas are integrated. That we assert, again, that notion that the context for student learning should be motivating. And it should be engaging. Students are participants in the learning. They're not the receptacles for it. That it should be respectful. Kids come from a wide range of backgrounds, not only linguistic background, but every kind of background, home circumstance, personal abilities, etc., skills, talents, experiences, that it must be respectful of all those voices and have a value perspective on what each student brings to the classroom. And finally, that it should be intellectually challenging for all kids. Appropriately intellectually challenging for all kids. Having done that quick run through of what this graphic is that guides the entire framework, we'd like to give you about 1 minute to turn to a neighbor and just react. Was there anything that resonated with you regarding this graphic? 1 minute.
So thank you so much, everybody, for being. This is truly going to be a shared effort and a collective effort if we're going to make it happen. No single teacher is going to make this happen in their classrooms. I was a classroom teacher for a long time, an exhausted classroom teacher every day, just like you all who are classroom teachers. I live with a classroom teacher. My husband teaches high school in an urban high school district. And he, he does those 12-hour days, and he plans on weekends, and he takes the whole summer to plan. So I know what it's like. So thank you so much for coming together and making this happen. Here's another question, just to continue my brief survey. How many of you in your schools or districts or counties have students who are English learners? Raise your hand. Anybody? Really? Okay. So, yes, so really one of the most wonderful things about this framework is that California, as the first state in the nation, really stepped up to the plate and said, we're going to pay attention to who our students are. And who our students are culturally and linguistically diverse students, all of our students, in fact. That's our point of departure for this framework. We're not going to try to cram kids into this prescriptive box. That's not what we're doing. We're going to take a look at who our kids are, and we're going to pay attention to what they need, and we're going to shape this framework around them. So that's the most important thing, I think, in terms of my little brief talk that I'm going to share with you. Also, if you can wrap your brain around these circles of implementation, which is kind of mind-boggling, you've got the framework. That's the framework in a nutshell. And really, as Tom was saying earlier, this is a process that's going to take years. So nobody panic. Everybody, put your shoulders down, take a deep breath. Don't feel like you have to know everything when you walk out the door today. We need to allow ourselves to be learners. And learning is a social process. That means we have to talk to one another. We have to share and open up our practices. So just everybody, that's kind of the spirit that we're working from here. Hopefully the next button that I push will advance the slide and not make the computer blow up. Let's see. Yes, it worked. Okay, so another question. How many people have seen the California ELD standards? Great, great. So if you haven't seen them yet, don't worry, because guess what? In the framework, in Chapter 1, there's a very lengthy explanation about the intent of the California ELD standards, how they should be used, what their structure is, what all those crazy colors mean, all those Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, what the heck is that? Because they look different from our previous standards. So I'm going to give you about a 1-minute overview of the California ELD standards. That's not going to be enough for you to fully understand them, but this is just sort of these are the big ideas. So basically the big ideas of the California ELD standards is that they amplify the Common Core State Standards for ELA literacy, and they augment them so that we as educators can pay attention to what's most important in those Common Core State Standards to focus on to ensure that our English learners succeed and are college and career ready and prepared to fully engage in meaningful civic life. So that's kind of like the goal, the intent, right? And they do it in some very particular ways. First of all, here's another thing you should know. The California ELD standards were not written from a testing perspective. Of course, they will be useful for formative assessment and summative assessment, et cetera. But really, they were written from a teaching and learning perspective. They were written to be used as a tool for classroom teachers to use in their planning so that when they're planning ahead of instruction, they're taking into account the needs of English learners. And so that they're sort of a guide for observing our English learners as they're engaged in instructions. That's really important. Very different from our retired standards, I would say. And they are a helpful tool in three very, very basic, kind of big idea ways. One is they help us focus on language development, and actually I would say on language, not as a set of rules, because language is not a set of rules. That's not what language is, that you just, I'm going to stick this verb over here and this noun over here, and voila, I've got language. That's not what language is, and we want our kids to understand that. We want our students to understand that language is a resource, a very powerful resource for making meaning in the world, right? And language development, therefore, is a social process. Actually, all learning is a social process. So it's so that we can get things done in the world. So we want our kids to understand we want them to understand why they're using English, right? We want them to use English purposefully and deliberately to get things done, like explaining or arguing for something they believe in, or justifying a claim that they've said using credible evidence. That's using English purposefully, right? We want them to be intentional, deliberate language users. That's the main thing. And we know that in order to be able to do that, we have to support our English learners to interact meaningfully in a few different ways. Interact meaningfully with others in collaboration, interact as they are with complex texts and other texts as they are interpreting meaning, and to interact with the world as they are conveying their ideas by producing meaningful messages. You with me? Does that sounds like something we could probably agree on, right? Yeah, I don't think anybody would disagree with that. I want that for my kids. We want that for all kids. So the ELD standards help us focus on that for English learners. But there's something else that the ELD standards help us do that's kind of been missing in ELD standards, and that's how to make what's happening in English transparent to our English learners, because really language is sort of the hidden curriculum in our classrooms. So how do we support our English learners to understand how English is working to make all of these meetings? And so the ELD standards help us as educators support our English learners to develop knowledge of language so that they can be deliberate language learners. So that's like wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, overview of the standards. If your head feels like it's going to explode, don't worry, because again, I said the framework is there to help you, Chapter 1. Also, has anybody seen my digital chalkboard? Used to be Brokers of Expertise. Write that down, my digital chalkboard. It's my digital chalkboard, right? There's a my? Okay. It's not mine, it's yours. But there are 2 California ELD Standards online professional learning modules there. And does anybody do professional learning or responsible for making sure that other people understand standards? Okay. So those 2 professional learning modules on the California ELD Standards have tutorials. There are facilitators guides so that you can talk with other people about the standards and sort of help them in their development. And if you're a teacher and you want to know about the California ELD Standards, you can go there and check that out too. Okay, so very quickly. Now, here's something that you will find in the framework. The way that we are approaching English language development in the state has changed, or actually has evolved, I would say, because for some people it hasn't changed. But as a state, in a unified way, it has evolved. And here's how the framework promotes the kind of English language development we want to see happening in all schools. It's a comprehensive approach that includes 2 things, and it's both and. It's not, you can't choose. It's like, well, we're going to do this and not this. No, it's both of these 2 things. It's both integrated ELD and designated ELD. And you can read the slide, but I'll just explain briefly that integrated ELD, that's when any teacher, every single teacher in the state who has an English learner in their classroom, whether it's 1 student who's an English learner or 100% of your classroom are English learners, we are using the California ELD standards in tandem with our content standards, Common Core State Standards for ELA literacy, or science standards if you're a science teacher, to ensure that we're meeting the needs of our English learners. Okay, with me? And that means that there's a true integration of language development across the content areas, because that's the only way we're going to support our English learners to make it. Designated ELD, that's a protected time during the day when we're really honing in on those particular language learning needs that our English learners really need to succeed in their content classrooms. Okay, we're really kind of, taking a laser-like approach to language development. Now, a lot of people say, yeah, that's what we do. Here, let me just kind of highlight some of the things that may be different for you or for some people. First of all, it states very, very emphatically and specifically that integrated ELD is when we've got the ELD standards down there with us as we are planning. So it's really used in the California ELD standards to guide instructional planning and implementation. Okay, that's different. That's different from before. The other thing that's different is designated ELD is not isolated language instruction, because you don't learn language in a vacuum. You learn language to make meaning in the world. Remember I said that language is a meaning-making resource. So that designated ELD, whatever it looks like in your district based on the needs of your English learners, must build into and from content instruction. The great thing is that there are many sessions today that kind of will talk about vignettes and talk about snapshots. Again, the framework is not just telling you, oh, this is what it is, good luck figuring it out. Because, gosh, what does that look like in kindergarten? What does that look like in high school, history, social science, et cetera? The framework has many, many examples to illustrate what that could look like. Now, I don't have time to open this can of worms because my time is almost up, but I would encourage you at lunchtime or when you get back to just kind of have the discussion. How does this new way of looking at a comprehensive approach to ELD compare to what we're currently doing? Just open up that can of worms. It's okay. Remember I said you have my permission. We all give ourselves permission to be learners. And let's just talk about it. And what kind of changes might be needed. Here's just an example of one of the things that will support that ongoing discussion about refining English language development is in each grade span chapter, and actually in each grade level section, teachers will find some framing questions for lesson planning. And you'll see that there are framing questions for all students that focus on really critical aspects of instruction, including preparing for formative assessment. How am I going to know that my students are really getting it, and how will my students know, et cetera. And some additional framing questions for English learners. And so that is sort of a really kind of clear message that we have to rethink how we're planning. You can't just teachers don't just teach by the seat of their pants, right? We can't do that. We have to plan carefully. So one of the things, I think Hallie talked a little bit about this, so I won't belabor the point, but this is one of the most exciting things for professional learning. Or if you're an individual teacher, if you just want to know what this looks like. Every single grade level has a section, as I mentioned earlier, that has an ELA literacy and ELD in action, that has a set of vignettes, 2 vignettes. The first vignette is ELA literacy, often integrated with another discipline, with integrated ELD. So you can see what it looks like. This one is from 4th grade. And it has lots of examples, lots of tools teachers can use. It even has dialogue between teachers and students, because our committee members were saying, could you show us what it looks like for a teacher to actually provide scaffolding in the moment, just-in-time scaffolding through dialogue to a student? So we included dialogue. But it also has templates that teachers can just take and use right away. Here's some of that dialogue. Also has student-to-student dialogue. And then the second vignette has the designated ELD companion. And it shows how designated ELD is building into and from that first vignette. And the way that a lot of people have been using these vignettes in professional learning is to promote dialogue among teachers about what's currently happening in practice, and then, kind of how to layer in new things. So unfortunately, my time is up, and I've actually gone over, so I'm going to hand it over to Nancy, and we'll see you later.
I have the enviable position of being between you and the break and talking about the structure of the framework. And Tom was very kind in saying that he contacted me about being one of the writers. The very best thing I did was say, I'll only do it if Hallie will do it with me, and if we get someone wonderful to help us with ELD. And so you now know why this document is as good as it is. It's because of Hallie and because of Pam. And now I will tell you, and you'll probably be able to tell this, I come at this from the perspective of a former principal, a former district administrator and consultant at CDE. I have the privilege of working for the CSU now, but I'm always looking at issues from a systems perspective. You all are here. You're one of the chosen few who got a seat at this event. So you have the job of going back, right, and talking to your colleagues. So I want to talk to you a little bit about some ways you might go back and talk about this document so that no one thinks they have to sit down with 1,300 pages, at night and finish it, sometime in the next century. So, first thing, organization. The chapters can be grouped. So the introduction, the overview of the standards, chapter 1 and chapter 2, really work together as an overview. If I were in charge of the world, I would say that every superintendent and principal would read the introduction to the framework and then have a breakfast together and discuss it. And then every school board member would do the same. These 3 that you see here in sort of red or brown color are the most important place to start. Now, if you're already very familiar with the standards, then you can skip chapter 1, but it really gives you kind of chapter and verse, point by point, how they're structured, and we try to do it in a parallel way so that ELA and ELD work together. So then you see the chapters 3 through 7. Those are grade level specific. Now, we have a lot of those chapters because we wanted to make the spans small enough so that it was really meaningful. You know, when you have a chapter that starts with transitional kindergarten and goes all the way to 6th grade, that's a huge jump. These chapters are in chunks that are really meaningful for teachers. And what will happen, and what I would recommend, is that teachers and others can access the appropriate chapters for them after they've looked at the overview. And so that breaks us down so it's not quite so overwhelming, not quite so much to read. I'll talk about how they're structured in just a second. Then we move into the third major chunk. These are what I affectionately call the systems chapters. These are all the leadership issues: assessment, access and equity, learning in the 21st century, implementing in terms of professional learning, etc. Then the criteria for instructional materials. These are chapters for your leadership teams, for your coaches, for your principals. But access them as you need them and know that these notions, the notions contained here, inform everything in all the other chapters. But here you're going to get deeper information about these specific topics. And then, last but not least, we have additional resources for you. Here, glossary, the appendix that Bill referred to about literature, other resources, etc. So 4 major chunks in this document. You need to be strategic about how you approach it. Every chapter begins with an at a glance. So you can put these together. Hallie and Pam and I did this many times. We just had all the at a glance sections together so that we could see how the chapters laid out across the document. You will see that we have attempted in every case to have common structures, common sections. So this one is chapter 4, grades 2 and 3. The way this chapter is organized is the same as the other grade level chapters. And so you're going to see some consistent structures that'll make your job easier as you help people access this. The other very helpful thing, Hallie talked about snapshots, which are short examples of instruction. Pam talked about vignettes. Those are longer for every grade level, examples of instruction. And then we have figures. Figures are little charts, examples again, tools really that you can use across a range. So we just have an example of various figures. Of course, the numbers refer to the chapters. So these are figures out of chapter 2 and then out of chapter 4. These can be very useful in professional learning and something that you can use in PLC meetings. So let me run through some of the chapters and just make some highlights. The introduction, Hallie really did a beautiful job of giving you a sense of that. It's a beautifully written, if I do say for ourselves, and everyone involved. Okay, Bill said. But it's meant to be inspirational, okay? This is, so parents can read this, everyone, community members. Chapter 1, what did I say before? Nuts and bolts. If you know the ELA literacy standards well and don't know the ELD standards as well, you should come here, or vice versa. Handy, very helpful. Chapter 2. This takes a little bit of explaining in that Chapter 2 contains key considerations because we kept coming across things in the grade level chapters and other chapters that we needed to explain, like motivation and engagement, scaffolding, academic language, et cetera, et cetera. And we didn't want to have to explain it all over again in every chapter, or else it would have been 2,000 pages, honestly. So you will find that, and this really follows the structure of the graphic that Hallie so artfully explained to you. So you'll see a section on the goals, the context for learning, the key themes, and then approaches to teaching and learning and English language development. Now you see why this chapter is so critical, because all of the beliefs, all of the instructional approaches are really here, and they inform everything that follows. So then the grade level chapters 3 through 7, as I said before, follow a similar structure. They start with a grade span overview, and then there will be grade level sections. You will find in each of these discussion of integrated and interdisciplinary approaches, key themes, and then we have supporting students strategically and English language development in the grade span in each one of these chapters. Finally, the systems chapters. I'll just point out a couple of important issues, and then there are sessions on many of these. In assessment, we've gone far beyond other frameworks in describing comprehensive assessment, cycles of assessment, and particularly formative assessment, what it is and what it isn't. I like to say this is not your grandmother's framework, okay? This chapter could apply to almost any framework. It is that complete and that comprehensive, but with the examples are related to ELA and ELD. Access and equity. We really are very visionary in our approach to all of California students. And so you see here a list of students who are addressed, and it is an even longer list than this. We're looking at issues of culturally and linguistically responsive teaching, universal design for learning, and multi-tiered system of supports, which are part of the general program.